So I'll skip to the next chart. And speaking of clarity and legislation, at Athena, we really just aggregated some of the best thought leadership. And we've only mentioned a few here of the leaders. The European Commission, the IEEE.org is a great place for technical folks like yourself. They do a lot of work to focus on advancing technology for humanity. The Center for Data Innovation, we have harvested from all of these groups and many, many more to create our own assessment methodology, principles and policies and guidelines that we can bring into organizations. Because the challenge is that there's been a lot of stuff written about what you need to be concerned about or what we want to care for in AI design, but not a lot of how. How do you actually take something like well-being or take something like human rights and design for that? And these are the groups that are really leading the way. And we're actually working with them and harvesting back their best practices. And speaking of their best practices, one of the groups, well, I should say it was the OECD who actually kind of put themselves out there as the first intergovernmental artificial intelligence standards arm of sorts, right? In terms of well-being, the OECD for years, through their Better Life Index or Better Life research, has aggregated information on happiness indexes, and these things are relative and subjective, happiness and quality of life in some emerging markets or emerging countries, developing countries, what is a good life there, and the expectations of people who live there is entirely different than in the US. So those things are cared for by these research institutes, but this group at Oxford and the Alan Turing Institute gathered all of the principles from about 70 different research studies and brought them together in 5 key themes that designers should be aware of, knowledgeable about, and incorporating into your system design processes. So, and they have provided these themes on the left. We have kind of modified the definition here, something that's beneficial to people's well-being, security and privacy, something that respects the autonomy of individuals and individual decisions and human values, social justice, is it biased or discriminating systems, and explainability. Can you explain your model? These are all areas that hundreds and hundreds of principles that say what you should be thinking about when you design for AI have been aggregated around these 5 themes. And I don't think that any one group's principles is better than any other. I think the IEEE has a very good set of principles, but for those of you who are new to these, there's some resources in the back of the deck, and there's tons of groups that have written principles. And my attitude about them is that, if you pick 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 and start to introduce them into your design discussions where they make sense, that's kind of just the key takeaway for today. On the right side of this chart is our attempt to take these principles at Athena and really drive them into practice. If you're not actually changing processes, helping people with new skills, impacting your governance in an organization, then these principles are really theory. They're nice to have, but they're very hard to act on. So from our assessment methodology, we just put some questions to the right here, and we don't have time to go through a lot of the stuff that's in this deck, but we'll be sharing it with you. And we thought if we put some things in here, you could certainly take them away. But from our assessment methodology, this is just a small sampling of the kinds of questions you'd want to ask around human rights and data agency, transparency, and auditable. Is your AI, is there transparency in human rights and auditability? These titles align as well to the principles you see on the left here. It's just that we have them structured differently around our own methodology. But these are some of the key questions that you would ask, around human rights. Did you assess and put in place, processes to test and monitor for bias through the life cycle of an AI system? As people know, in until now, when we designed a system, we got a set of requirements, we built the system, you deploy it, it does its thing and it continues to run, but it doesn't change. With AI systems, once they're deployed, if they're learning systems, they can change when they're out in an environment. So how is that impacted, and how are you caring for that? Are you instituting kill switches? So some of our assessment questions ask these kinds of things if you're doing them, and if not, then what can we do to embed actions in your business processes, and not just solution design processes? Embedding activities in your strategy process or your legal department, your ethicist, the role the ethicist plays, embedding these better practices or these things into processes is how they become real. And that's really what we focus on.